Spinosaurus aegyptiacus was a mysterious predator. More than a century ago, when its first fossils were discovered, researchers were surprised. The bones spoke of a giant unlike anything ever seen before, a dinosaur with crocodile jaws, an imposing dorsal sail, and a history so unusual that it would confound scientists for generations. But although it was taller than a Tyrannosaurus rex and longer than a Giganotosaurus, it seemed designed for water. From the beginning, there was a problem that added to the mystery surrounding this fearsome animal. The first bones were lost in the war. Many others appeared in markets and private collections, far from the reach of scientists. The image of the animal was pieced together from fragments, photos, and comparisons. It was like reconstructing a movie with only a few frames and the soundtrack. How did it hunt? How big was it? What did it do daily? Did it really swim? The questions grew with each new clue. For this reason, in the next few minutes, we will travel back to its time and territory. We will see what the world that shaped it was like, who it descended from, how its body changed, what prey it hunted, and what rivals shared its home. We will recount his rise as a river hunter, his fall when the environment changed, and the legacy he left in the great history of dinosaurs. Above all, we will try to answer the key questions. Was he an active swimmer or a shore hunter? What was the purpose of his sail? Why did he dominate? And why did he disappear? This is the story of Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, the most feared river predator in history. To put things in context, let's look at the dates. Spinosaurus lived in the Mesozoic era during the Cretaceous period, specifically in the Cenomanian. We are talking about 100 to 93 million years ago, with its heyday around 95 million years ago. It did not coexist with Tyrannosaurus rex. The T-Rex came much later, in the late Cretaceous period. The Spinosaurus came before it, and its kingdom was different. The large rivers of North Africa. Imagine that landscape. Rivers cross the plains. Some sandbars appear and disappear with the river's floods. Very tall plants grow on the banks. The current carries logs, leaves, and clouds of mud. Giant fish with saw-like spines swim in the water, coelacanths as sturdy as logs, lungfish that must rise to breathe and then dive back down, and huge crocodiles that loom like shadows. In the air, pterosaurs glide above the surface, waiting for prey. On land, other theropods keep watch. It is a world rich in food, but also in competitors. And yet, there is one place that almost no one takes full advantage of. The area between the shore and the deep channel. That stretch where the water rules. That's where Spinosaurus comes in. But if we want to understand where this predator comes from, we have to look at its family. Spinosaurus is a spinosaurid, a group within the theropod dinosaurs, the bipedal carnivores. Spinosauridae are divided into two subfamilies, Baryonychinae and Spinosaurinae. Spinosaurians are descendants of land-en animals, and Spinosaurus is both the largest and the most adapted to water of all. However, the characteristics of piscivory, the ability to feed on fish, were already present throughout the family. Therefore, we can say that the link between spinosaurids and water is very ancient, and that the species that descended from these ancestors took this tendency very far. Their best-known relatives appear in very different places, which already tells us that the Spinosaurid idea worked on several continents. In England, Baryonyx had a long skull, conical teeth, and a huge claw on its hand. And although it was smaller than Spinosaurus, it measured around 10 meters. In contrast, in Niger, Suchomimus was larger, with a low crest and powerful arms. Meanwhile, in Brazil, Irritator had a slender snout that also suggested a life close to water. They all share key details: teeth without serrations for gripping, narrow jaws, and a certain taste for fish. And over millions of years, the recipe was refined, from small hunters on riverbanks to super predators with bodies adapted to that activity. Spinosaurus is the most extreme version of that recipe, which we will discover shortly. If we break down its anatomy piece by piece, we see a different plan from that of the typical large theropod. Let's start with the head. Its snout was long and narrow, with conical teeth without sharp edges. They did not cut fillets, but rather held slippery prey, suggesting that it lived near aquatic environments. Researchers imagine that it behaved like a bear, being a generalist and opportunistic land predator, but capable of catching fish. However, unlike the bear, Spinosaurus does show anatomical signs of being a fish catcher. At the tip of the snout, there are signs that it possessed high sensitivity, as we can see small nerve channels that suggest it could detect vibrations or subtle changes in the water. This is an extremely valuable skill when the water is murky and the fish moves without being seen. The nostrils were also positioned further back than in other dinosaurs, near the roof of the skull. This allowed it to keep its snout very low and continue breathing by sticking only the upper part of its snout out of the water. It is the same stealth trick used today by some semi-aquatic animals such as hippos and crocodiles. Overall, the Spinosaurus skull was strange in several ways. Unlike crocodiles, the skull was compressed laterally rather than dorsoventrally. And although both are hydrodynamic, one works better to minimize lateral drag and the other vertical drag. This means that for Spinosaurus, moving its head sideways underwater would have been more difficult than tilting it up and down, so submerging its snout straight into the water would have been the most efficient way to break the surface, like a heron. Most people tend to compare Spinosaurus to a crocodile. Both are indeed semi-aquatic archosaurs with similar conical, interdigitating teeth, but most crocodiles are piscivorous when they can be. They can chase prey or ambush it underwater. Others argue that Spinosaurus was more like a heron, clearly adapted to hunt in water but not to live in it or chase prey underwater. However, the reality is that this huge predatory R was neither a heron nor a crocodile, but something unique and different from any modern animal. On its back, we find the most striking feature, a sail formed by very elongated neural spines. What was its purpose? It probably did not have a single function. It could have helped to show size, communicate strength or status, attract mates, or scare off rivals. It may also have played a role in body temperature, gaining or losing heat depending on exposure to the sun and wind. And why not? It may have served as an anchoring structure for the back muscles. We don't have the Spinosaurus factory manual, but one thing is clear: it was a visible feature, impossible to ignore. And in a world of many predators, standing out counts. On the other hand, Spinosaurus arms were robust. This sets it apart from other giants such as the T-Rex, which has short and rather useless arms. In Spinosaurus, the hands ended in large, curved claws. And on the bank of a river, hands like these help to dig into the mud, hold on to prey that is still wriggling, or gain stability when the body turns to accommodate a fish in the mouth. Think about what a fisherman does when he pulls out a big catch and holds it down against the ground with his hands. It's not a perfect comparison, but it gives us an idea. Meanwhile, the hind legs were shorter than those of other megatheropods. That tells us it wasn't designed for long runs on land. Its feet were wide, perhaps with membranes between the toes. A wide foot distributes weight on soft surfaces and in water provides thrust. But the biggest surprise is its tail. In the most complete fossils, we see a laterally flattened tail shaped like a paddle. It is not the rigid tail of a runner. It is a tail that can push water. It does not make it as efficient a swimmer as a fish, of course, but it does give it a tool to move and maneuver in the aquatic environment with control that other theropods did not have. Imagine that tail moving from side to side in short, precise strokes, like an oar that never stops working. But interpreting these features is not straightforward. Does a tail adapted for swimming prove that it spent most of its time in rivers? Or could it have used that same tail to display, intimidate, or maneuver on land? The evidence is often contradictory. That is the beauty and the frustration of paleontology. Every answer raises new questions. What is exceptional about Spinosaurus is not only its anatomy, but how it forces scientists to be creative. Nothing like it has lived in the last 70 million years, and nothing like it will ever live again. But all methods, in one way or another, follow the principle of comparing extinct creatures with living ones to arrive at reasonable proposals. However, with Spinosaurus, there is nothing truly comparable. To study it, CT scans, computer models, digital reconstructions, and even robotic models in water tanks have been used. Each method reveals a different aspect of its life. Together, they reveal an animal that refuses to be pigeonholed. With all this, how did it hunt? Two scenarios fit well and are not mutually exclusive. The first is that of stalking in shallow water. Spinosaurus waits half submerged, with its snout still sensing vibrations. When a fish gets close enough, the snout advances like a trap. Conical teeth, a firm grip, and onto the shore. The second is a short chase in the water. We are not talking about long underwater runs, but rather bursts of speed and turns with the tail, just enough to catch prey that would not expect this kind of attack from a dinosaur. Depending on the season and the height of the river, it would alternate between one hunting method and the other. Among the great carnivores, Spinosaurus is the odd one out, the misfit. It is not a simple fish eater, nor is it an ordinary land hunter, but something more complex. A predator that challenged everything we thought we knew about dinosaurs. If we compare it to other giants, the difference becomes clearer. Tyrannosaurus rex is a land runner with a brutal bite and serrated teeth that break bone and flesh. Giganotosaurus, another huge predator, is also designed to cut and tear large prey on land. But Spinosaurus does not go down that route. Its main weapon is not the power of a destructive bite, but the ability to hold on to what is difficult to retain in water. And its advantage is not speed on land, but control at the banks of rivers and canals. And here it is worth pausing to talk about size. It is often said that Spinosaurus is the largest known predatory dinosaur in terms of length, with figures reaching 15 meters in some estimates. Its weight and bite, however, are not in the same league as T-Rex, which is later and more massive in proportion to its length. It is important to understand this without making it seem like a competition. They are not the same type of predator, nor did they live together. T-Rex reigned over the forests and plains of North America millions of years later. Spinosaurus dominated African rivers much earlier. Two worlds, two kings, two different ways of being the best in their own domain. The world of Spinosaurus was full of life. Giant fish were its daily bread. However, many of these species were armed with dangerous spines and very tough skin. Furthermore, in a river full of food, it was not the only hunter. It shared space with huge crocodiles and other predatory dinosaurs. That is why it was so important to be a specialist. Being able to move through the water more comfortably than other theropods, it had access to food that it did not exploit well. And if, in addition, its body allowed it to stabilize itself in the mud, detect prey without seeing them, and breathe with its snout low, its fishing schedule was flexible. In this way, it could take advantage of different times of the day, different levels of the river, and different corners of the plain. Meanwhile, the smaller young Spinosaurus would surely avoid the adults so as not to become food or receive unwanted blows. In many large predators, different age groups tended to use different spaces. It is easy to imagine juveniles in secondary channels, shallower pools, and more covered areas, trying their hand at smaller prey and learning the craft of predation so that in the future they could terrorize and dominate other species. But why did this predator dominate? There are several reasons why Spinosaurus came to dominate the rivers. The first is specialization. In an environment with many hunters, gaining a niche with less competition is a huge advantage. The second is the sum of adaptations. A long snout is not enough. You need suitable teeth, well-placed nostrils, feet that work in mud, a tail that pushes water, and senses that respond in a murky. The third reason is flexibility. An animal that can change its strategy as it moves up or down the river, that can swim a little, wade, rest on sandbars, and move through channels, has more options for finding food and avoiding risks. And the fourth, for size. A body over 13 or 15 meters long is imposing. Few dare to openly dispute prey with such an animal. In addition, size also helps to conserve heat and better withstand brief changes in the environment. Whether it hunted in groups is something we do not know. Perhaps it could tolerate others in areas rich in fish. as some current predators do when food is abundant, but it could also have been more solitary and territorial at certain times. Without clear footprints and scenes frozen in time, we have to be honest here. There is no definitive evidence. And in science, saying "we don't know" is also an honest answer. One of the main reasons for this ignorance is that many of the Spinosaurus bones appeared in contexts far from the site where they were discovered. At this point, it is worth telling the other half of the story, the research. In 1915, Ernst Stromer first described Spinosaurus using fossil material found in Egypt. They were fragments, but they included those characteristic dorsal spines that look like sails. That specimen became the reference for the species, the holotype or first specimen found. All species, except humans, have a holotype that serves as a comparative standard. Years later, during World War II, bombing destroyed the collections where they were stored. Bones were lost and have never been seen again. Only drawings, photos, and notes survived. Spinosaurus became a respected but distant ghost. Meanwhile, teeth and bones began to appear in markets in several countries. Many came from areas rich in fossils, but without clear records of the exact location or rock layer in which they had been found. They were polished, reassembled, and sometimes even mixed with pieces from other animals. Understandably, with urgent needs, many people saw these fossils as a way to make money. But for science, losing the context of a find is losing half the story. Knowing which layer a bone comes from, what other species accompany it, and how it is oriented is as valuable as the bone itself. Then, light began to shine from two sides. On the one hand, the discovery of well-preserved relatives, such as baryonyx in England, helped to understand the Spinosaurus recipe. On the other hand, new fieldwork in North Africa, with dialogue and patience, made it possible to trace some fossils back to their original sites. Starting in 2014, the team led by Nizar Ibrahim presented key material from Morocco that changed the image of the animal. Shorter than expected hind legs, wide feet, high nostrils, and, years later, a tail that seemed made for pushing water. These remains were named the neotype of Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, establishing themselves as the new reference standard for the species, as the original material had been lost. Added to this were computer models, CT scans, 3D reconstructions, and tests with models in water. It is not a single piece of evidence that supports the idea of a semi-aquatic Spinosaurus. It is the whole, the sum of details that fit together. However, not everything is certain. Did it have feathers? In theropods, feathers are found at the base of the group. But such a large animal, in a warm climate, and with a life closely linked to water, tends to lose insulation. Perhaps it had smoother skin, perhaps remnants of fine feathers in specific areas. Without preserved skin impressions or pigments, we cannot say for sure. Did it have visible teeth like a crocodile, or were they covered by lips? In many dinosaurs, the lips protect the teeth from the air. In Spinosaurids, the case is complicated by the shape of the snout and the concentration of sensors at the tip. There are arguments for both sides. Did the sail serve as a rudder? As a tall structure, it can influence stability, yes, but the real thrust in the water comes from the tail. Regarding the sail, the most solid argument is the obvious one. It is very visible, and what is visible communicates. With all this context, let's return to the river. Dawn breaks. Fog rises from the warm water. The current is slow, but the Spinosaurus pushes forward. Near the shore, something cuts through the surface almost silently. Only a dark line, part of the sail, and the upper part of the snout are visible. The rest of the body is hidden under the water. The animal does not move much. The water brings signals. A lungfish rises to breathe, breaking the calm with a brief sound and then sinking back down. The Spinosaurus tail strikes sharply to the side. Its body moves forward just enough. Its neck thrusts its snout forward. Teeth and pressure. The prey struggles, but the mouth clamps shut like a trap. A turn of the neck, a step toward the shore, claws in the mud, and positioning the prey to swallow it better. The sail dripping, the tail like a silent whip. Hours later, the river recedes. Large pools remain, connected by tongues of water. In these small pockets, the fish are more concentrated. Here, the Spinosaurus walks calmly. Its broad feet do not sink as much. Each step is a decision. At the slightest movement of a fish, its snout touches the water. It does not dive headfirst. It calculates. When it is worth it, a flick of the tail, a partial dive, a grab, and back to a sandbar. Later, the sun beats down. The animal lies down with its body in the shade and its sail in the sun. Perhaps this way it loses or gains heat more quickly. Perhaps it is just an comfortable position. In the distance, a giant crocodile moves. Neither wants to get hurt. Changing banks is easy when you know every corner of the river. Above, a pterosaur glides down to try its luck with the remains. The Spinosaurus ignores it. Not everything is worth the effort. But when the rainy season arrives, the world changes. Rivers rise, flooding low-lying grasslands and connecting lagoons that were previously separated. For some hunters, this complicates matters, as food becomes scattered. For an animal that can move freely through the water, it's a different story. New routes appear, new areas to stalk, new channels that bring fish from afar. Here, the tail is an ally. It is not a matter of swimming miles in pursuit, but of moving decisively between currents, crossing from one side to the other, staying stable while the water pushes against the legs. During these floods, the banks also change the most, forcing the animal to relearn the terrain. A river specialist learns quickly, otherwise it falls behind. The passing of the seasons also affects reproduction. We don't know what their nests were like or how many eggs they laid. If we follow what we see in other theropods and large reptiles, it is reasonable to think of nests in high areas, out of the flood, and cared for at least a while. A young Spinosaurus would be easy prey for many. Reaching its imposing size requires years, constant food, and avoiding dangerous encounters. That is why juveniles probably used small banks and dense vegetation, where their lighter bodies could move without attracting attention. Even so, the years pass, and, as always, the environment changes. We are not talking about the famous asteroid at the end of the Cretaceous period. Spinosaurus did not reach that point. We are talking about gradual changes in climate, sea level, river patterns, and the availability of the large prey it so desperately needed. If a specialist depends on very specific fish, and those fish decline, the specialist suffers at the hands of other predators that feed on any prey. If channels shift or disappear, if floods become less predictable, if rivals change, the balance is broken. The truth is that spinosaurids disappeared long before the great extinction that wiped out most dinosaurs. Their lineage, however, remained for tens of millions of years. On a geological scale, that is a resounding success. But let's return to the questions that brought us here. Was Spinosaurus an active swimmer? Everything points to water not being just an occasional resource. Its tail, feet, and nostrils suggest an animal that spent a lot of time in the water, capable of moving through it with some thrust and control. Does that make it swim like a fish? Number. Its bones and body are not those of an animal made for a completely aquatic life. One study examined bone cross-sections from hundreds of living and extinct animals to establish a relationship between bone density and the animal's lifestyles. Aquatic and semi-aquatic vertebrates tend to have denser bones with less space for air than terrestrial animals, which tend to float. The latter is a problem if you need to hunt underwater because you waste a lot of energy to submerge yourself. However, Spinosaurus is an exception to this rule, as it had bones that were dense enough to sink in water. Scientists were confused by this finding, as it contradicted biomechanical tests of buoyancy and stability that showed that it would be difficult for Spinosaurus to submerge, so it would need to paddle constantly to prevent its dorsal sail from causing it to tip from side to side. However, this may mean that Spinosaurus moved through the water like a hippopotamus. It did not sink or float, but rather suspended itself and moved slowly and efficiently, maintaining direction and speed with gentle strokes, rather than using fast and powerful swimming. We must bear in mind that hippos have fewer aquatic anatomical features and are less aerodynamic than a Spinosaurus. So, if they can swim, why wouldn't Spinosaurus? Now, did it hunt from the shore like a heron? Yes, it did. Conditions changed, and its strategies had to change with them. And why did it dominate in North Africa? Because it found a niche full of food where competition was less intense and adapted its body to exploit it better than anyone else. Does it make sense to think about colors or adornments? There is no direct evidence, but we can play with the possibilities without selling smoke. An animal that lives on shores and in murky waters benefits from camouflage, brown, greenish, grey tones. A large sail could have lighter or darker areas, perhaps changing appearance with the spilling of blood at certain times. In today's natural world, many animals use visual signals to communicate. It is not uncommon to think that such a visible feature would also play that role. Today, all we have left of Spinosaurus are fossils and its legacy. Birds are the only dinosaurs that survived the great extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period. They are not descended from spinosaurids, but they do share the theropod tree. Every sparrow, every heron, every eagle carries a story that begins with bipedal predators. Seeing a heron standing still on a riverbank, stabbing its beak precisely into the water, is a modern scene that helps us imagine, with all the differences involved, what a Spinosaurus could do on its scale. When we think of dinosaurs, we tend to think of serrated teeth, running, and imaginary roars. Spinosaurus forces us to think of something else: backwaters, mud, subtle signals, tails pushing water, and bodies adapting to the border between two worlds. That is its value. It is not just big, it is different. It expands what we thought possible within its group. So, if we had to sum up its life in one sentence, it would be this: while the others looked at the plain, it looked at the river. That's where it found its opportunity. That's where it built its reign. And when that river changed, when the cycles and prey were no longer the same, its story faded away. Not because of a lack of strength, but because the stage no longer supported its work. Research on Spinosaurus will continue. Every new well-documented tooth, every contextualized tail fragment, every well-described layer of rock is a step towards seeing it better. Maybe someday a much more complete skeleton will appear, with skin impressions or details we can't even imagine today. Maybe we'll have to adjust the picture again. Fine. That's how science works. It is not a list of eternal truths. It is a long conversation that improves with each piece of evidence. The real Spinosaurus is not a final image. It is the very process of discovering, correcting, and looking again. It is a reminder that life experiments, and that sometimes to be king, you don't have to run faster than anyone else. You just have to learn to move where others don't know how. That's what Spinosaurus did. It did it so well that its name is no longer just that of a weird animal with a sail on its back. It is the symbol of a different path within the dinosaurs. And so, when you close your eyes and imagine this giant, don't put it on a dusty plain running after land prey. Take it home, put it in the river, with its sail cutting through the surface and its tail snaking underwater. Let it feel the world with its snout. Let it choose the moment. You'll see that suddenly everything falls into place. This was the story of Spinosaurus, the predator that broke the mold.